The plane glided silently through the stormy night, but something was wrong. The cabin lights flickered, the air smelled like burnt flesh, and the passengers, they weren't normal. Their faces held the same haunted expression, the look of people who had already stared death in the face and somehow escaped. Then the intercom crackled to life with an inhuman voice. Balance must be restored. One of you must leave, or the plane will decide for itself. The passengers locked eyes with one another. The real horror wasn't outside the plane, it was sitting right next to them. As the turbulence settled, passengers of Flight 707 exchanged uneasy glances. The cabin was eerily silent. There were no crying babies, no chatter, just the low hum of the engines. A man in a business suit, Charles Mendez, checked his boarding pass again. He was sure he hadn't booked this flight, yet here he was. Across from him, an elderly woman, Margaret, clutched her purse as if holding on to her very soul. A teenage girl, Emma, whispered prayers under her breath. Then, a voice echoed through the speakers. It was distorted, inhuman. Welcome aboard, travelers. You have all defied death once before, but fate demands balance. Every hour, one of you must be sacrificed, or the plane will take matters into its own hands. The passengers erupted into chaos. Some laughed nervously, brushing it off as a cruel prank. But then the lights flickered, and a man in seat 17A screamed as he disappeared. His seatbelt was still fastened, his clothes neatly folded in place, but he was gone. Panic set in. Margaret sobbed, revealing she had survived a train derailment a year ago. Emma's hands trembled as she admitted she had been the only survivor of a drowning accident. One by one, the passengers shared their grim stories, all realizing the same terrifying truth: they had cheated death before. And now, it was coming to claim what was owed. A clock appeared on the screen at the front of the cabin. 59:59. 59:58. They had 1 hour to vote. As the countdown ticked, alliances formed, betrayals unfolded. A man tried to hide in the bathroom, but the plane swallowed him whole. The door flung open, revealing an empty space where he had once stood. His screams lingered in the air long after he was gone. Each hour, the sacrifices became more brutal. Charles, trying to reason with the group, was forced out of the emergency exit mid-flight, his final scream lost to the wind. Margaret tried to shield Emma, but the plane had no mercy. It dragged the old woman down through the floor, her fingers scratching the carpet as she was pulled into the abyss. Finally, Emma remained alone. The clock hit 0. The lights dimmed. The hum of the engines grew deafening. The entire plane became weightless, and suddenly, Emma wasn't on the plane anymore. She was falling through endless darkness, towards a fiery pit below. The voices of the damned whispered her name. And then, she woke up, back in her childhood bedroom. Heart racing. Was it all a nightmare? Her phone buzzed. A boarding pass notification. Flight 707. Gate 13. Departure in 15 minutes. Anna adjusted her uniform and stood in the dimly lit galley of Flight 707. Something felt off. The passengers were unusually quiet, their faces oddly still, as if frozen mid-thought. Her hands trembled as she picked up the flight manifest. It listed names, but instead of seat numbers, there were disturbing notes beside each one. Jonathan Price drowned, age 42. Samantha Hallow, burned alive, age 19. Lewis Carter, decapitated, age 55. Her heart pounded as she scrolled to the bottom of the list. There it was. Anna Lewis, cause of death, unknown. Her breath hitched. That's when the intercom crackled. Attention, passengers. Welcome aboard the final journey. Please fasten your seatbelts. Your destination is eternal. Anna staggered back, her pulse hammering in her ears. The whispering voices of the passengers grew louder, like a chorus of the damned. She turned to the nearest row and gasped, "Jonathan Price, the man listed as drowned, was dripping wet. Water pooled beneath his seat, his skin pale and bloated. Samantha Hallow sat across the aisle, her body covered in burns, her melted flesh clinging to the seatbelt. Anna stumbled down the aisle, her eyes darting wildly. Every passenger bore signs of their horrific demise. A man in first class sat stiffly, his head tilted too far to one side, his neck had been snapped. Another woman's wrists were slit, blood soaking the carpet beneath her. Tears welled in Anna's eyes. This wasn't a normal flight. She was transporting the dead. She ran to the cockpit, pounding on the door. "Captain, something is wrong." The door creaked open. Inside, the pilot sat motionless. His hands gripped the controls, but his skin was rotting, maggots writhing in his eye sockets. The co-pilot's uniform was drenched in dried blood, his chest cavity ripped open. And yet, the plane was still flying. Anna staggered back, her stomach twisting. A gust of wind slammed into her as an unseen force yanked her into the cabin. The lights flickered, casting twisted shadows on the walls. A voice echoed through the speakers. "Anna Lewis, your time has come. Take your seat." She turned to see an empty seat in row 13. Her name glowed on the headrest. Her knees buckled. Memories flooded her mind, flashes of a car accident, the screech of tires, the crushing impact. She had died that night. This wasn't a plane. It was a ferry to the afterlife. And she was the new ferryman. The passengers turned to her, their dead eyes locking onto her own. Their lips curled into knowing smiles. The plane descended into darkness. And Anna took her seat. A mother sat beside her sleeping son, adjusting his tiny blanket. The hum of the plane was steady, soothing. She sighed, exhausted from the long journey. Then she noticed something. The child across the aisle was staring at her. His eyes were wide, black, empty. She turned back to her son. His seat was empty. In his place sat a lifeless mannequin, its plastic face frozen in a twisted, eerie smile. Tara gasped, her trembling hands reaching for the mannequin. It wore the same clothes as her son, Alex. The seatbelt was still fastened. But he was gone. Her breaths came in ragged gasps as she looked around the cabin. Other parents were whispering in confusion. A father shook the shoulders of his toddler, only to realize his child was stiff, a doll. Panic spread like wildfire. A voice whispered over the intercom. "We are reaching equilibrium. The children were never meant to leave." Tara's stomach dropped. What did that mean? A woman screamed from the front of the cabin. Her daughter had vanished, replaced by a porcelain doll with dead, glassy eyes. A man in first class stood up, frantically searching for his son. He yanked open an overhead compartment and found a tiny, writhing hand reaching out from the darkness. The lights flickered. More children vanished, replaced by identical mannequins. Tara sobbed, gripping the cold plastic hand of the thing that had replaced her son. Then she noticed something horrifying. The mannequin was blinking. It turned its head towards her, its smile widening. "Mommy," it whispered. "You took me where I don't belong." Tara let out a choked scream. She turned to the window, and for the first time, saw what lay beyond the clouds. A massive, swirling vortex of shadows. And inside it, thousands of tiny hands reaching out, clawing, trying to escape. The plane belonged to them. And now, the children were being returned. A stewardess walked down the aisle, calm, unfazed. She leaned down, whispering in Tara's ear, "You were never supposed to bring them into this world. The plane is correcting your mistake." Tara's vision blurred. The last thing she saw was the mannequin reaching out for her. Its fingers dug into her skin, pulling her into the abyss. The plane continued its flight, but it was no longer carrying passengers. Only dolls with frozen smiles. Hit that subscribe button if you dare. We are close to 100 daring people. See you soon.